Today on your Debrief, Trump's last-ditch effort to stop his criminal sentencing has been shot down, clearing the way for his sentencing hearing tomorrow, just days before his inauguration. We're talking with courts and legal reporter Zach Schoenfeld coming up. Plus, Washington's final farewell to President Jimmy Carter. A look inside his funeral service held this morning at the National Cathedral. But first, to Southern California, where the 4 wildfires that began late Tuesday and early Wednesday expanded to 6 separate fires by Wednesday evening. It's now being called one of the most destructive natural disasters in Los Angeles history. Firefighters were able to contain the much smaller Woodley fire last night, but the Palisades, Eaton, Hearst, Lydia, and Sunset fires continue to burn, already tearing through at least 28,500 acres and killing at least 5 people. The flames are now threatening West Hollywood, while large parts of Altadena and the Pacific Palisades have been leveled. 180,000 people are still under evacuation orders today, and more than 2,000 homes, schools, and businesses have been reduced to ash and debris. Residents say they are devastated.
We're the lucky ones. Our neighbors have been devastated, and we're so sad.
I don't even know the words to use. There's not even words that you could use right now.
It's really bad. North of here, there's entire blocks that are completely gone. And I mean that literally. There's not a house standing.
Firefighters and resources have poured in from neighboring states, and the U.S. Navy has pledged 10 helicopters to help fight the flames. But while it's now safe to conduct airdrops, experts say the heavy winds that have fueled the fires will continue Thursday, with gusts expected to reach 60 miles per hour. A wind advisory is set to remain in effect until Friday. News Nation's Nancy Liu is on the ground in Pacific Palisades. Nancy, what does it look like there?
Well, the winds have eased somewhat for now, and that is helping with the firefight here in Pacific Palisades. But as you can see, much of this community is already lost. This is a residential area where it is just sheer devastation for as far as the eye can see. At this particular home, the back garage is still smoldering and on fire. But firefighters are finally getting a break today. New crews are coming in from all over the country. I spoke with a firefighter who is getting his first break in 2 days. They are exhausted, and the water situation, the scarcity of water out here has been a real issue. He says that they've been draining pools, using sand, stomping flames out with their boots when they need to, because they've not had the water they need to put out the fires, and he actually apologized to residents for not being able to do more in saving homes. But the situation is dire for people coming back to the neighborhood. This is a house gutter, and you can see that part of the Christmas lights have now burned onto and soldered onto the roof gutter. But many, many residents returning to absolutely nothing. Back to you.
Thank you, Nancy Liu. Please stay safe. Meantime, LA city officials say 20 people were arrested Wednesday night for looting evacuated homes. Officials say they are working to secure evacuated areas and will arrest anyone that remains in an evacuation zone. As the raging fires continue to spread across Los Angeles, President-elect Trump is on the attack, blaming California Governor Gavin Newsom and other Democrats in the state for the destruction. Trump says mismanagement of water and forest resources in the name of environmental protection caused the fire. Trump went as far as calling on Newsom to resign. Newsom says Trump is playing politics with a tragedy. Joining us to discuss this and much more, Alex Gangitano, White House reporter here at The Hill. First, I want to just say that the loss of life and property is paramount in all of this, but I do want to talk about the politics of this disaster. Is Trump versus Newsom something we should all get used to over the next 4 years? Newsom will still be the governor of California. Many think he is eyeing a 2028 presidential run.
That's right. Is this a window into, in general, how Trump will be treating Democratic governors in particular during the next 4 years of the Trump administration, and specifically Newsom? As you mentioned, this is somebody who's been seen as the future of the Democratic Party, while the Democrats are looking to rebuild and figure out who their next presidential contenders are. He's often named, but they have had a past of, kind of a tiff for taff fighting with one another, both strong personalities, and this is the latest case. I mean, yesterday Trump went off on Newsom in several True Social posts, like back to back to back, saying you should resign, this is your fault, you're blamed for this disaster, also roped in President Biden as part of the blame. And then Newsom, like you mentioned, has hit back basically saying this is not the time to play politics. People are suffering out in California.
Newsom says now is not the time to play politics, but he's no stranger to verbal combat. He goes on Fox News all the time. I would think that, some sparring verbally between them is probably coming.
That's right. I think Newsom, once things improve in his state, I think we're going to see him fighting back. You're right. He is no stranger to going on television, including Fox News, and criticizing Trump. I think we're going to see him throughout the Trump administration be that messenger for Democrats, kind of that attack dog role, because he has been that role in the past. So it's definitely not the end of a feud between the two of them. I think it will be a 4 years long feud.
Trump was on Capitol Hill yesterday meeting with Senate Republicans. The Hill's Alexander Bolton and Al Weaver had some really interesting insights into that meeting. Senators were working to convince Trump that breaking the issues that they want to pass into two different reconciliation bills is the best strategy forward. First, focusing on border and energy, coming back to the tax cuts later in the year. But the reporting from the room is that Trump is unconvinced, and he's still pushing forward with this one big, beautiful bill that he wants. When do you expect congressional Republicans and the White House to settle on a strategy?
Yeah, that's the question. I mean, this was a 2-hour meeting in person, and it seemed like nothing was settled. Trump was really holding on to his idea of this one big, beautiful bill. Well, Trump allies like Senator Lindsey Graham, also, of course, Majority Leader John Thune, were trying to convince him that two bills so that they could tackle the border, they can tackle, like you mentioned, energy and defense right away, and then deal with extending those Trump tax cuts, which will take much longer, is the way to go. I think the only real window into how this will work, especially with Thune at the helm, there's a lot of changes in what Senate leadership looks like, is during the continuing resolution negotiations last month, when Trump, as well as Elon Musk and some other allies, stepped in and said, this is the way we're going to do this. And everybody had to follow suit and figure it out from there. So that's the outline that we have so far of how that works. But it does seem like Senate Republicans were pushing pretty hard to say, no, this is actually, I think, the best way to do this. And it comes down to being able to set forth the Trump agenda, which is really the most paramount thing to Trump, is to get his agenda, especially his border policies, through.
The reporting is that House Speaker Mike Johnson seems to believe that having one bill is the best way to go. Also talking about including raising the debt ceiling in that big, beautiful bill, as Trump puts it. 38 Republicans, though, voted against raising the debt ceiling when Republicans tried to ram it through before the Christmas break. How are Republicans going to get those guys on board, especially considering their slim margins in the House?
Yeah, Speaker Johnson faces definitely an uphill battle in getting others in his caucus on board to tackle this very difficult task. Of course, there's a Republican majority in Washington come January 20th, and so it's a bit easier than trying to negotiate, but there seems like there's negotiations amongst themselves, that they're not all in agreement. And this also might be a window into, if Speaker Johnson is the main Trump ally on Capitol Hill, and then we're seeing Senate Democrats and John Thune also as their leader, Senate Republicans and John Thune as their leader, being the group that will be more likely to push back against some Trump demands, while Johnson is the one to agree with Trump. So far, it seems like that's what the writing on the wall of how the next 2 years will look.
Let's talk a little about foreign policy. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz is reacting to comments from President Trump that he would like the U.S. to expand, possibly taking Canada as the 51st state. Greenland, there's been talk, reacquiring the Panama Canal. Scholz says there's a certain incomprehension among European leaders about what's being said by the president-elect. I think it's probably no surprise, but Trump is off to what would appear to be a rocky start with European allies.
Yeah, it seems like every week with how European allies treat Trump has been different in the past since he won the election in November. I mean, we saw Italian Prime Minister Meloni go down to Mar-a-Lago to sit down with Trump. Obviously, we saw Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, who is now resigning. And so some world leaders went down to say, we're embracing you, we want to be able to work with you. And now we're hearing from German Chancellor Scholz saying quite the opposite and saying we're confused by this land grab suddenly. So I think with any given moment, we'll see how these other world leaders try to work with Trump. And I think what's interesting, though, about Scholz in particular is, the economic influence that Germany has. You can't ignore them as a leader in Europe. And so Trump is going to have to figure out how to work with him. And Scholz is already criticizing some ideas that Trump has thrown out. That's definitely a rocky start to begin with.
There's a certain amount of eye rolling that's been going on in reaction to Trump's expansion comments. But you have South Dakota Republican Representative Dusty Johnson introducing this bill that would allow Trump to purchase the Panama Canal for a symbolic price of $1. Should we continue to roll our eyes at these comments from Trump, or are we starting to see this become something that's to be taken more seriously?
Yeah, I mean, it does seem like congressional leaders are taking it seriously. They're ready with some legislation to move forward on, renaming the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. We heard that right after Trump's press conference on Tuesday. Now Congressman Johnson's introducing a bill regarding Panama, and I do think it should be taken seriously considering that Trump has repeated these targets towards Panama, towards Greenland, and Canada now time and time again. He hasn't dropped these ideas over the last month, and so just the fact that he keeps bringing this up, and he's also brought up, he hasn't ruled out using military interference in Panama. Meanwhile, he ruled out using it in Canada. So clearly he is starting now to think through some of these plans, and they're not just, hollow threats.
I want to go back to what we were talking about in Congress just a minute ago. I wonder if you think that eventually the rubber is going to hit the road when it comes to spending. We heard this report that Elon Musk, actually there are comments from Elon Musk where he told reporters that his Doge commission probably wasn't going to be able to achieve $2 trillion in federal deficit or federal cuts as he had promised. Maybe they could get half that, also probably highly unlikely. The total discretionary spending per year is about $1.7 trillion. A lot of that goes to the military. Republicans are going to be reluctant to cut that. What's going to happen when the Freedom Caucus is asked to spend a bunch of money on tax cuts without the spending reductions that they also want?
Yeah, I think everybody is facing this learning situation here that the Freedom Caucus is trying to figure out how much leverage they have. If they actually can kind of be in a thorn on the side of Trump when it comes down to spending cuts. And then Elon Musk, he claimed in a really interesting interview that he held on Wednesday that if you he said something like, if you look around the whole federal government spending, you would hit anywhere you turn that you can cut. Well, that's interesting because he also said that he wanted to cut $2 trillion, and now it seems like more of a $1 trillion plan. As you mentioned, that still seems unlikely. So I think he's learning while still projecting a lot of confidence about what he'd actually be able to do. But meanwhile, the Freedom Caucus is powerful. They can be somebody that Trump has to answer to. And then on top of that, as you mentioned, this is a lot of defense spending. That's the bulk of our spending here. But it's also something that Democrats are interested in, cutting some defense spending. So if there are some Republicans to get on board with some of this, who knows what could end up happening with some of these government cuts.
It's interesting. I think there's a significant portion of the Republican Party that feels like they were sent to Congress with the mission to slash funding. I don't necessarily know if that's what Trump feels like his mission is going to be, but we'll leave it at that. Alex Gangitano, thanks so much.
Thank you.
It's a somber mood in Washington, D.C. today as former presidents and members of Congress join the Carter family to honor the life of former President Jimmy Carter during his funeral at the National Cathedral. News Nation's Joe Khalil has the latest.
Today was really the day that the nation got the chance to mourn and to honor the memory of the 39th President, Jimmy Carter, with the state funeral, one of the highest honors and most dignified ways that we remember that select few group of people who've occupied the Oval Office. At the National Cathedral today in Washington, after having lied in state in the United States Capitol under the Rotunda Tuesday and Wednesday. And today you saw dignitaries there, you saw lawmakers, you saw friends and families, some of the nation's highest ranking officials, both past and present. And of course, there as well was that exclusive group that Jimmy Carter belonged to, the group of living presidents. All of those remaining were there today, including the current occupant of the White House, Joe Biden, who gave the eulogy for Jimmy Carter. And he said if he could describe the president in one word or one phrase, he said it would be character, character, character.
As we all know, Jimmy Carter also established a model post-presidency by making a powerful difference as a private citizen in America. And, I might add, as you all know, around the world. Through it all, he showed us how character and faith start with ourselves and then flows to others.
As you heard there from President Biden, there was a lot of reflection, not on President Carter's term in office, but on the person that he was. Remember, having 4 decades plus after he left office, he really defined what it can mean to have a post-presidency that's dedicated to service and to helping your fellow man. We've heard those kinds of tributes, not just from people who allied with him politically, but also from several prominent Republicans in Congress this week as well, including Speaker of the House Mike Johnson and Majority Leader John Thune in the Senate. Now, Carter is not going to stay in Washington for long. He's on his way now actually to Georgia, to his home in Plains, where he's going to be buried next to his spouse, his wife of more than 70 years, Rosalind Carter. So that is what comes next for the late president.
Thank you, Joe Khalil. President-elect Trump's last-ditch attempt to block sentencing for his New York hush money conviction is now officially in the hands of the U.S. Supreme Court. New York's highest appeals court today rejected demands for a hearing from Trump's legal team that is fighting to dismiss the case. And tomorrow, TikTok's future also in the hands of the Supreme Court. The social media company will face justices as it tries to fend off a nationwide ban set to go into effect January 19th. Joining me now is the Hill's courts and legal reporter, Zach Schoenfeld. Zach, there has been a flurry of activity surrounding Trump's hush money case. The question is, with the clock quickly running out, will the president-elect's sentencing actually happen tomorrow?
Well, he does have this one pathway left, and that is the U.S. Supreme Court. Trump all week has been trying to appeal this Friday sentencing that was only scheduled just a few days ago. He has been telling judges in both New York State Court as well now the Supreme Court, telling them that they should put this sentencing and the criminal proceedings on hold as he continues appealing his claims of presidential immunity. But at this point, the New York State court system has been rejecting his claims. As you mentioned, he went all the way up to the state's top court, the New York Court of Appeals, but in that order this morning, rejecting it. So really, he has one path remaining here, and that is with the U.S. Supreme Court that still could come in here in the final hours and stop this sentencing.
There has been some controversy surrounding a phone call between Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito and Trump that happened on Tuesday. It came one day before attorneys for the president-elect filed an emergency application with the Supreme Court to block his sentencing. Alito says they only discussed a job reference for a former law clerk, but does the call raise ethical questions?
It's certainly been raising questions among Democrats and some left-leaning groups. They have been raising alarm since news of this First by ABC broke this story about this phone call between Justice Samuel Alito, one of the court's leading conservatives, and the president-elect. But Justice Alito, he did confirm this call publicly, but in a statement had been defending it, saying that this call was just to talk about his former law clerk who was up for consideration for a post in Trump's administration. Yes, the Supreme Court justices, they're important people who are, making rulings that impact large areas of American life, but they also, for their former law clerks, act as their former employers. So Justice Alito is saying this is no different than anyone else who lists their former boss on a job application as a recommendation, and that he was just doing a courtesy of taking this call. He did say they did not discuss that emergency application from Trump. Justice Alito said at the time of the call he didn't even know that that was happening, and they also discussed no other court business.
Zach, it's interesting. Trump is actually in the same room as the justices at former President Jimmy Carter's funeral here in Washington, D.C. There's cameras everywhere, but is there any indication there could be interactions between Trump and the justices at the funeral?
I mean, anytime that there is a president or a president-elect of the United States in the same place as a Supreme Court justice, every moment is heavily scrutinized. That's why this call between Trump and Alito, even if it was just to talk about his former clerk, is getting so much attention. And it's really now just a coincidence that the funeral happened to be today, and Trump today was in the same room as 7 of the 9 justices on the Supreme Court. All of the justices attended the ceremony today, except for 2, Justices Clarence Thomas and Neil Gorsuch. But Justice Alito, the Chief Justice, as well as most of the other court, they were all in the room today. Now, I was watching on the cameras and didn't see any moment where they happened to run into each other. But of course, if they did, every moment of that interaction will be heavily scrutinized.
Tomorrow, the U.S. Supreme Court will hear arguments on the looming ban of TikTok. Trump has requested the court delay implementation of the ban. Trump's lawyers filed this strange legal filing full of platitudes about Trump being an amazing negotiator who just won a historic landslide. I don't know what that has to do with anything. This is a ban that was passed by Congress and signed by President Biden. Seems like the question before the court is the ban constitutional?
Yeah, and President-elect Trump took no position on that, firmly saying in that brief that he takes no position on the First Amendment question, but instead told the justices that he could come in and, he claimed that with his deal-making experience, that if they allow him to get into office, that he would be able to resolve things, and he said that would, negate the need for them to even get involved in this case and have to decide this potentially seismic First Amendment question that could cut off access to TikTok nationwide. But it's important to point out here in this case, Trump isn't a party in this case. There will be these oral arguments Friday morning, but we'll see lawyers for TikTok getting up there, a group of creators, as well as the federal government. But importantly, who's not up there is Donald Trump or his lawyer. They will not be participating in this argument, nor did they ask to. So the justices now, if they so choose, can decide to take a look at and give some serious weight to this friend of the court brief.
After the Supreme Court hears arguments on Friday, how quickly should we expect a ruling? And if they don't rule before January 19th, is the ban going to go into effect?
If the court does not say anything by January 19th, this divest or ban deadline would go into effect. That's, with the fact that the Supreme Court is deciding to take up this case and take it up on such a speedy schedule, scheduling oral arguments for January 10th after only taking it up at the end of last calendar year, that would suggest that perhaps the justices are going to rule before January 19th and they want to get their word in. But even though arguments are being held very fast, there's nothing set in stone that mandates that the justices issue a ruling. So that is one big question going into these arguments, is will the justices afterwards, will they issue some sort of ruling either way before the 19th and that deadline hits?
Is it known what would happen on our phones if the justices say nothing or allow the ban to go into effect? Is it the application just going to disappear?
It's possible that for people who already have the app downloaded on their phones that, it might not just disappear from their home screen one day. But this law would effectively require places like the Apple App Store, the Google Play Store and the like, that they wouldn't be able to continue helping TikTok, promote this app, have users download it. TikTok likely wouldn't be able to update the app. So, even if you have it on your phone and it would survive past January 19th, eventually when new versions of iOS come out, and TikTok doesn't update accordingly, it's going to slowly over time just not work.
Could get a bit glitchy moving forward. Zach Schoenfeld, thanks for all your reporting here. We'll continue to follow the developments.
Thanks, Drew.
The 2024 presidential race is over, and now pollsters are turning their attention to other races to gauge public sentiment as the country prepares for a second Trump term. One focus point is the Virginia gubernatorial race between Democratic former Congresswoman Abigail Spanberger and Republican Lieutenant Governor Winsome Earl Sears. According to a new Emerson College poll, Spanberger currently sits at 42%, with Earl Sears at 41%. 13% say they are undecided. Joining us to break down the numbers is Matt Taglia, Senior Director of Emerson College Polling. Matt, this race is tight, but there are some interesting factors that stand out. Voters are split along gender. This is a theme that we've seen a lot in recent elections. Talk us through how men and women are saying they'll vote.
That's right, Drew. And just, the top line data, again, a 1-point race, 13% undecided. When we look at that gender data, we see that Spanberger is ahead, which we could kind of predict, among women, 47% to 31%, with 18% undecided. And then on the other side, we see that Earl Sears is ahead among men, 52% to 37%, with 9% undecided. So there are quite a few more women undecided. We see the similar theme of a gender split as we did in the 2024 races. But I think that undecided number among women, that's really hurting Spanberger's numbers. We also see that Earl Sears is leading independents, 32% to or 35% to 32% rather. So very much a tight split there, but there are still many undecided as well, 28%. I think the bottom line here is that Spanberger will have her work cut out for her in shoring up those female voters and independents. It's a very competitive state of play.
Matt, the top issue for Virginia voters is the economy. The majority of voters feel their situation is worse than it was 4 years ago. 27% feel their situation is better. 22% say there is no difference. How will we see the issue of the economy playing out in this race?
Yeah, and we can get a few hints of how that might play out by looking at some of this underlying data. So 40% of Spanberger voters say that their situation is better than it was 4 years ago versus 32% who say it's worse. And it's completely flipped for Earl Sears voters. 17% say their situation is better, 60% say it's worse. When you look at those all-important undecided voters, however, only 17% say that their situation is better versus 59% who say it's worse. So these look a lot more like Earl Sears voters, these undecided voters. That may give us a hint as to how they might lean. 44% of the same voters say that the economy is their top issue, and then an additional 25% say that housing affordability is a top issue. So I think the bottom line here is that the economy is going to be a top issue as it was in 2024. We'll see how that changes throughout the cycle. But as it stands, we're looking at a potential photo finish, and the economy will be top of mind of voters.
Virginia, always interesting in these off-year elections. Matt Taglia, thanks for the information. We'll continue to follow.
Thank you, Drew.
The private sector added 122,000 jobs in December. That according to ADP's National Employment Report in partnership with Stanford Digital Economy Lab. The figures also show that annual pay was up 4.65% year over year. Hiring slowed in industries like manufacturing, natural resources, and business services. The report processed payroll data from more than 25 million U.S. employees. It provides a near real-time measurement of employment, according to ADP. The numbers come as the Department of Labor is set to release the December jobs report tomorrow. Artificial intelligence could be coming for your job. 41% of companies worldwide say they plan to reduce workforces by 2030. Those figures, according to a World Economic Forum survey published Wednesday. 77% of companies said they plan to reskill and upskill their employees between 2025 and 2030 to work alongside AI. About 70% of companies want to hire workers to design AI tools and enhancements, and about 62% intend to recruit more people with pre-existing skills to better work along with artificial intelligence. Jobs like postal service clerks, executive secretaries, and payroll clerks are among the positions that could experience the fastest decline. The survey comes as the environmental impacts of AI have been in the spotlight. A 100-word email generated by an AI chatbot uses 17.5 ounces of water, just a little more than the average water bottle size. It also burns as much electricity as 14 LED light bulbs do in 1 hour. That's today's Daily Debrief. I'm Drew Petrimoulx. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to the Hill's YouTube channel, and come back here soon for the intersection between politics and policy.